First I'll give you just kind of a rundown of the park. There's over 10,000 acres here, 26 miles of shoreline, which is probably a little bit less now, the water's way down, but because that stat's been out there for a long time. Over 20 miles of trails being mostly 2-track, but there are single tracks too with North Country Trail. 250 sites with electric. There's 100 up here and then another 150 down there by the lake shore. 6 rustic cabins, and we'll get to some pictures of them, but there's also 3 bunkhouses, which are the 3 that are right down here. Those were started by the CCC and finished by the WPA. There's a dining hall which we're in. This was finished in the 50s, started by the CCC as well. Trailside shelter, that is over on Nebo Trail. There's a lot of sense of ecology here. There's 3 natural areas, 3 separate natural study areas. We have actually 4. There's a book this thick of ongoing scientific studies going on here. I mean, I can't name them all, but there's bird studies, there's pitcher's thistle studies. What else have you gotten studies for?
This past summer we had 3 avian studies, 1 bat study going on, 2 insect studies. These are all out of universities around the country. A pitcher's thistle study out of University of North Carolina. There's just a lot of, because we're such a unique location on Lake Michigan, very little development here ever. We get a lot of research groups from different universities coming in doing different projects here in the park.
Yeah, the point kind of makes a natural route for birds to travel during migration. So it's kind of neat out there. I was out there last week and every little clump of cedars was packed with songbirds and little sparrows. And I mean, I'm not a bird guy, but it's amazing because normally you walk through the forest, bird here, there. Right now they're migrating, they're just packed with birds. Lots of berries out there, and it's kind of like Mission Point. It's probably a little bit more humid out there, and so you get more berries and fruit. And then we've got, I don't know how many are registered, but there's dozens and dozens of historical sites in here. So it makes sense to go chronological, kind of how things evolved here. And I'll kind of cover the area a little bit too. So Waugoshant's Lighthouse would probably be one of the first things that's not, aside from Native American, as far as Native American artifacts and sites go, there's not a lot here. It was a trade route, and that's about the extent of it as far as we know. So I'll kind of start in Waugoshant's 1865. As you guys know, the lighthouse gets built before the Civil War, or started, and then they finish it after the Civil War. It's abandoned in 1912, and it sat there until World War II, until it got bombed. We'll cover that kind of stuff. The 2 shipwrecks that are on the beach, more or less, are going to be right up here, and it's these 2. The Anglo-Saxon and J.A. Smith. Does anyone have any more extended knowledge of them? There were schooners. The only thing that we have that really talks about that is from this man right here, Cap Loay, or John Loay. He was born in, well, he died in the 60s, and he lived to be in his 90s. So you do the math, he was probably about 10 when that happened. Yep, yeah. And he's a living legend here. So he gave a first-hand account to Bob Pintel, who maybe some of you are aware of. He was the manager here for a long time. He was here since the 60s. So in that kind of that overlap, he took a first-hand account of that, not a first-hand because he would have been 10, but of those, his understanding of that wreck, and then the subsequent aftermath of it, how the wrecks were there for a long time. And he said when he was a kid, they could row a boat right through the 2 schooners that were still washed up, they were beached. So I've got that here. I actually made copies, not a ton of them, but I got 6 or 7 copies I can give you. And because for me to read it to you, it's someone's handwriting from the 60s. It's almost impossible. The interesting thing about him is he also gave an account of another ship that is, I don't remember the exact name of the type, but it's pointing at both ends, whatever that means. And it is it's located someplace in the park over by the organizational campground. And he's got a little bit of information about the name of it and everything in his account. That's handwritten on a piece of notebook paper or a scratch pad, which I also included in the copies. But that's something you're interested in pursuing further, how that fits in the broader context of history, then that's certainly something that could be a neat project. His group was the first, the Loys, settled in the area the same year, about 1887. And they originally were partially in Cecil Bay, and then they ended up full-time down here, just west of where the campgrounds are now. These two wrecks that we talked about, the Anglo-Saxon and the J.A. Smith, they're listed on navigational charts until probably the 60s. So on real old charts from maybe 1900s, they're listed as on an underwater obstruction, like a shipwreck. Then they became an underwater obstruction, and then in the latest charts, they're not on there at all. So they may be pushed up by ice far enough or buried, or I'm not sure of the condition. But rangers here, that even one of the rangers that's here now has seen it in person. So they're still around. Going into the logging era, I mean, that's been hit pretty hard, especially with Cecil Bay right down the road. But if you guys are interested in it, there is some first-hand accounts that Bob took of people who lived there and also were in the camp here. So there's a lot of original documents from that time period too. I won't get into too much. As far as the park goes, we had a mill in Sturgeon Bay, which most of you are aware of, and Fuller, I think what's his first name? Gil Fuller wrote a book about it, and that's going to be the bulk of the knowledge we have of Sturgeon Bay is from that book. And those are things. What's back there? Do you want to go back there and show them where you got all that stuff? And
yeah, we have the small gauge rail there, and then the bigger hunk of iron sitting there is one of the grates out of the old boiler from the mill itself. And then the glass jar was found by one of the foundations out there. All this stuff has been hauled onto shore by the public. There are 2 piers out there at Sturgeon Bay, and they dumped all the stuff between the 2 piers. They just chucked it in the lake when it was of no use to them anymore. And now the water's down. People are starting to find this stuff under the water, and they're dragging it up on shore. And we're picking it up and bringing it back to the park, contacting the state archaeologists and making sure that that's what they want us to do with it. So all the artifacts, just about all the artifacts we have here, are things that the public have retrieved for us and brought back up on shore, and we're just collecting them so that they don't disappear. After the scat gets finished up, we can walk down there and we'll show you I'll tell you where everything came from that's on the tables down.
The foundations are still down there. I'm usually here at night during the summer, and in my time being there a little bit in the afternoon, there's still a lot of disturbance of that area. So people are actively going in there and digging stuff up, and there's shovel marks, little holes everywhere. We just don't have the manpower to watch it like we should. But that's the kind of activity that's going on there. So if you are interested in that and you see someone up to no good, please let us know. His book was it in Pleasant View or Bliss Township Town Hall they could get it, or there were some copies available?
Yeah, or for those of you who know Dennis Bay, a lot of people know Dennis. Dennis can get you copies of the book too, or you can contact him, we'll get you in touch with Dennis.
He's got a lot of neat stuff in there. He's got pictures of the town. That town had a store, or a general store, blacksmith, post office, cider hall, pool hall. I mean, it was a hopping community, and you can still see the remnants of a lot of the foundations, and then a lot of those dunes are a product of the disturbance from all the log piles and the landings and everything. Had its own railroad, had its own docks, which you can see if you go into Google Earth. I don't know if this one will show it too much, but if you hop in here in Google Earth sometime and look right here, you can see the remnants in the dock. The railroad grades are still down there, and it's a neat area. So University of Michigan has a summer camp here in 1909. 1920s, they start studying bird habitat here, and that's probably the beginning of how scientific study came to be something that's commonplace in this park. In 1940 to 51, they have a Department of Geology or Geography through University of Michigan, which one of these photos actually has the bus, and it's in 1940, parked at the manager's office that says University of Michigan Department of Geography. It's kind of interesting. These 2 pictures, I don't know where they're taken. They're from our files, but I couldn't tell you. This very well could be, Big Suck or something. I couldn't tell you. The other type of activity that's going on here at the time was, so they're milling down there in Sturgeon Bay. The Loways are here, right around the park. And in the wintertime, they were fishermen. In the wintertime, they were going out to the point at the very end and spearing lake trout. And there's an article, it's sitting back there, but from the 60s, basically, someone in the news did an article about them building these shacks like this, and if you look at that one in a better light, it's a different one. So there's more than one of them out there that they were going out there in the winter time and then scooting on the ice and spearing lake trout. And the lake trout were, massive things. And it probably was not just the ways. I mean, if it was me and it was wintertime and I had some spare time and I was down at Sturgeon Bay, to walk across the ice on a cold day wouldn't be bad either. So that kind of activity was probably going on quite a bit out there. So eventually they log everything, land goes back to the state, they don't pay the taxes, there's no profit left in it, and this becomes a game preserve. Operated as a game preserve from 1922 to 1927, and then in the early 30s, 1932, it starts as a park. And a lot of these that you see have that white border, it looks like a page put on there. They're from Royal Brunson, who was the manager's son here, the first manager. Well, he was probably game preserve first and then became in parks.
No, Brunson was parks.
He was always parks. What was the guy that started as game preserve? We're not sure. That history file back there was done by Bob Pintel. He started a lot of the stuff in research of who the succession of managers was and the people that lived here. And even in there's a lot of question marks about exactly who succeeded who, because they didn't keep very good records and we don't have a lot of the original records. So we're just kind of going off of what he wrote down. But Royal lived to be, is he still alive today? We got all these from him, so he would have been alive until at least the early 2000s. That's when these are from.
His daughter.
His daughter brought these in?
Yeah, his daughter Grace is the one that supplied us just a ton of pictures and information about the park. And she married one of the LeWays, so she stayed in the area. So she's the one that supplied us with a lot of the information we have about the early history of the park.
So it goes back to being a game preserve, and there's still slash piles everywhere in this park. And these guys harvested those slash piles and made money off of it. That would be Mount Nepo back there, and this kind of give you a look at what the land would look like at that time. Is not much left of it. This is their house. This would be over by the modern day organizational campground. You probably saw the sign coming in. And then this one's the original game refuge sign. Kind of give you some looks at what would have been here at the time, the type of vehicles they were using. We're not sure exactly where that one was taken, but it's one of the roads headed in here. Now this is a picture of this camp, and I can try to blow it up for you because you'll want to see this in detail.
This camp actually sat right here where the Pines Campground sits now. And the well house here was put in as the wall source for the camp, and the flagpole, when we'll go outside and walk around, is still sitting in the campground. We have a sign up there to let the public know that that's the original flagpole from the CCC camp that sat right here in the park. Picture back there on the wall is a picture of the crew that was here. I believe that picture was 1934. So we try to keep some of the artifacts here in the buildings for people, because we use this building quite a bit in the summertime to put on presentations and whatnot. We want to give credit where credit is due. Those guys did an awful lot of work out here at the park to get us going.
Yeah. CCC Camp closes, everyone goes off to war, and then in 1942 the Navy releases the park, the western end of the park. So basically from here on, I mean, I'm not sure to what extent they were using this actual area, but that's what happened. They were testing drones and remotely controlled aircraft, and they were flying them out of Traverse City. And that kind of history we'll really touch on big when we go back there, because all the documentation that the Army Corps of Engineers has done is back there, and it's too hard to slide in and scan in. But the Brunson family did take a trip out to Waugoshance, and this is what it would have looked like in the 40s. So that's kind of the intro to that. I mean, we can kind of skip this area. There's not much left after this, and then go back there and talk about it some more if that works out for you guys. This is what you'll see. If you guys want to walk out there today and take a look at this, this is more or less what it looks like now. From people that have been in the area a long time, they said when they were a kid, it still had metal on it. And we'll watch a video before we go back there of these flying. What's that? Oh, it's a glider. They were testing gliders out there. They call them Gloms. I'm assuming because it's combining glider and bomb, Glom, very clever. But that's a remnant of it. And it all makes sense how that flew when you see the video, because you know, standing in it for a long time, people thought it was a helicopter or an airplane, but if you go out there and look at it, it's ridiculously heavy. It kind of makes sense when you see the video. The park reopens, and the dining hall is completed, and those were finished too right after the war, I believe. Yeah, those weren't quite finished yet when they left for the war, so those got completed. And then over time, Wilderness becomes, you know, the place to be in northern Michigan as far as camping goes. This launch is now closed, but when lake levels are higher, there was actually another launch out at the point. And that's kind of what it looks like now, just the vehicles and campers have changed, you know.